Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, and this is episode 36. I had to look down for a minute. No. Um, and on this week's episode, I wanted to talk about regionalism in American sports, or sort of what different kinds of regions that different sports became popular traditionally over the years and how they've changed. So I kind of covered this topic on a national level in a few podcasts ago when the World Cup was happening because that was interesting. But in America, we are really not a soccer based country. I would say soccer is becoming popular in certain areas, but we have a lot of other sports and a lot of other areas that are defined by the different sports that are popular. So, yeah, let's get into it here. Now, obviously, as most of you know who've listened to this podcast for a while, I have very strong ties to both Kentucky and Wisconsin, and ties to North Carolina and Indiana. So I'm going to start there, but I'm going to work my way out to other things too. So let's sort of start with Wisconsin. There is So there, they do play hockey some, and hockey was kind of popular back in the day. But in the '60s, and even before then, the Packers were popular because of Curly Lambeau. They won a few titles, but when Vince Lombardi showed up in the '60s and they won so much in such a short amount of time, football really became the most popular sport in Wisconsin. And I say this now because American football is probably the most goes to every part of the country kind of is popular sport, but it is slowly changing. Some people say it's changing. Some people say the NBA is becoming more popular, but I don't believe it. I could never believe it. Um, so yeah, if you actually look at the original NFL teams or markets, a lot of people don't realize this, but they are from the upper Midwest, most of them, Um, you got Cleveland was a really old team before they moved and then came back again, and Chicago is also as old as Green Bay. Chicago and Green Bay are the two oldest teams left. Surprisingly enough, the Arizona Cardinals actually also started in the Chicago, Wisconsin area, then moved to St. Louis, then moved to Arizona. So, yeah, so there's that. And then, eventually football did reach out to where the New York Giants are. And I think some of the Northeastern colleges like to say they played football a long time. So, but generally speaking, football has always been an upper Midwestern sport. And now that it's sort of expanded across the nation, it feels kind of weird sometimes. And I say that because, like, um, we're going to talk about Texas in a minute here, but it feels weird to me sometimes the way they try and promote. And don't get me wrong, when they promote New York teams, they are promoting football to a degree. But like when they're trying to really promote like what they're doing in Los Angeles with bringing football there, it feels weird. Okay, I'm not saying people in Los Angeles don't like football. They obviously do. Those teams will probably make money, but and they did back when the Raiders were in LA, but it does feel kind of odd. It is not the preeminent sport there. It doesn't feel natural sometimes. And I'm not even saying USC has always been a big football college, but it doesn't feel the same with the NFL there. It's not like so whenever there's not like in the Super Bowl this year, you had the Patriots and the Eagles, and you could just feel like it felt more intense with the Eagles in there because they're more, you know, they're still like they're still New England-ish, New England light. Obviously, I'm not saying Philadelphia's in New England; it's its own kind of thing, but it had a little bit of that tie back to the sort of upper Great Lakes region where football really started its roots and was popular early in the days. And I remember when the Packers last won the Super Bowl, it was the Packers versus the Steelers. And it felt like it was inescapable because these are two of the oldest, most storied franchises. They're both from the upper Midwest where it really kicked off in the beginning. And it was electric almost. You know, I guess the Giants Patriots was kind of electric for those fan bases because they were so close together and storied. But to me, the Packers Steelers one felt very electric too. Anyway, so that all being said, that's why the NFL and football really kind of got its big start there. Now, in college football, it's a little different because they were playing it in the Northeast long before the NFL existed. But nowadays, college football is most popular in the Southeast. And that is because a lot of those places don't have NFL pro teams. The only NFL pro teams, like Alabama, for example, is the biggest college football program right now. And, there's storied franchises, storied teams like LSU and Florida and, Clemson and all. There's other places too. The North has their teams like Michigan and Ohio State. But why it's so popular in the South now is because, okay, so you got the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons, and recently the Carolina Panthers and the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Dolphins in the NFL. But, in places like Georgia, the University of Georgia is way away from Atlanta, and Clemson, there's no pro team in South Carolina, although you could go over to Charlotte. It's just not a big tradition of the pro teams there. The NFL still doesn't quite have the reach it could in those areas. I guess it's gotten slightly better since they put the Tennessee Titans in there, the Jaguars in there, but neither one of them have won a title. So unless they win a title, and the Panthers haven't won a title either, neither have the Falcons. So the only team that's won a title in that area is the Saints and the Dolphins. Well, and the Buccaneers did. But so you see, you're not that heart of the South where college football is really popular. There are no pro title winners. So that's probably part of the reason why it's just not as popular as it could be. So yeah, so that's where football started, in my opinion, in the Great Lakes region / some of the Northeast, and on the college level, it really picked up in the Southeast region. Now, so that's the big sport in Wisconsin. Now, I'm going to talk about some more of these interesting scenarios later on, but so what was really interesting was in the 70s. So after being great under Lombardi in the 70s, the Packers started to stink. And the professional basketball team, the Milwaukee Bucks, got really good and won a title. And even then, I think the Packers were still more popular. But an interesting development this year is the Milwaukee Brewers have a chance of getting pretty close to winning it all, and they're really good. And the Packers look sluggish again. So, it's really interesting to see when an off sport or something gets popular, or when the off sport is doing well, how does this town react? Usually the fans will show up, obviously. I mean, if your team is playing for a title, you're going to show up. But it's weird. It feels unnatural, And to be honest with you, baseball does feel kind of unnatural in Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin, like I said, is football, hockey, maybe some basketball, but it really doesn't feel like a baseball state. In fact, I don't think their college baseball team is even D1. So it feels really unnatural that their baseball team is doing so well. So yeah. Anyway, I'll talk about more of those in a minute. So, next one I wanted to move on talking about was Kentucky, because it's where I've lived the most now. And in Kentucky, it has a sort of an interesting thing where it's popular for a sport that's not very traditional televised, but it was traditional back in the day, right? We have horse racing here, and it's very popular here still. And the Kentucky Derby, of course, is nationally broadcast every year and pretty popular still. And, it's just a totally different kind of sport. The athletes are animals, for one. And, we talk about great jockeys and great owners. And for a while there, it was almost kind of in a slump because it had been 30 some years since they'd had a Triple Crown winner So it was almost like it felt like we went 30 years without a champion, right? Whereas in the NFL or in the NBA or any of those other things, you get a champion every year. So it's a very different experience, but it's a lot of fun. I have to say, it just feels cool to be a part of something that doesn't go on everywhere. The other two big tracks are in Baltimore and New York, and then of course there's the ever increasingly popular Santa Anita. But it's not part of the Triple Crown circuit, so it doesn't feel quite as cool. But yeah, so it's really weird to be in a state where that started from. And I went to college, of course, at the University of Kentucky, and though Churchill Downs, the actual big name track, isn't there, Keeneland, another big track, is there, and that's most of the horses are actually from the Lexington area. So it's really cool. It's cool to be around all these horses, and it's such a different experience. You can't really describe it unless you've lived it. It's like it's a competition that not everybody else gets in on. So you feel like exclusive for wanting to be a part of this competition, if you will. So yeah. Um, but then, of course, horse racing isn't the only sport that's popular in Kentucky. We are in a basketball state. I also lived in North Carolina, and I lived in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area where there's NC State, Duke, and UNC who've all won national championships in basketball as well. So that was also a very big basketball state, in my opinion. Though they have the Panthers and though all those schools have football teams, um, basketball will always probably be number one in North Carolina. Although they do have pretty popular minor league baseball, too. But yeah. So when you look at the map of America, you know, you see these NBA teams, and don't get me wrong, like San Antonio Spurs in Texas are very popular with their fan base and have won a lot of titles. But I guess the most original two popular teams were the LA Lakers and the Boston Celtics, and then the Bulls have a pretty big cult following, the Chicago Bulls. But it's almost like basketball is more popular in Kentucky and North Carolina from their college teams. And I have to tell you, it's intense here sometimes with the Kentucky Louisville rivalry. Since both schools have won a lot of titles and some have hired each other's coaches, it was kind of weird for me as a kid because while basketball was popular in North Carolina, like I said, they did have a pro NFL team, so it didn't feel like it was the only sport. And football is becoming popular in Kentucky now in some ways. But when I was a kid, moving here, I grew up in Wisconsin, being part of the University of Wisconsin Green Bay tradition, and they played a lot of football, won a lot of football. Football was very serious. Even my parents' high school had a state title in football. So, I mean, it was the sport for me as a kid. And I'd roll around here, and everybody'd be going on about basketball, and I had to get used to that. I'd be like, well, yeah, I guess I better watch this too. I better watch this if I want to be around all my friends. I better watch this because I'm at the University of Kentucky. That has the second most championships in basketball and has the most games ever won. So I had to get used to it. It was a bit of an adjustment, and um, because we are so passionate about our sports regionally in America, you have to like what the locals like. I mean, I guess you don't have to, but it feels like you're missing out on part of the experience if you don't, if you will. Like, my wife and I went back this weekend, and we went back to Lexington because we were celebrating our anniversary, and we had to go to the horse race track. We had to stop by the college. You don't feel like you're part of the town if you don't do those things. Like we love other things about the city, but we had to do those things, and it's quite cool. It's kind of cool. It's a connection to the place. This is a geography podcast, so I'm trying to tell you the connection to the place it felt like. Um, yeah. So then I've also lived in Indiana for a little bit of time, and there is very odd. It's just very odd, sports wise, because its most popular sport back in the day was car racing. It's still popular for the Indy 500, but the IndyCar circuit is not the most popular car racing circuit anymore. NASCAR obviously is. And so they even had to start hosting a NASCAR race on that track to keep it afloat, right? But they love that IndyCar. They still talk about it all the time. And then of course they have their old basketball team in IU who won a bunch of titles when they had the old firecracker Bobby Knight, but they've had trouble staying relevant. And then Purdue actually technically hasn't won titles, but always tries to stay relevant in football and basketball, but you always feel like they kind of come up short. And then in the very northern part of the state is Notre Dame, who is a legacy football program who was really good for a while. But they feel like they're part of Chicago and not the real Indiana. So, and then Indiana had Larry Bird, who was from there, who was the most famous, almost maybe the most famous player ever. Not quite, but he was very famous. So, yeah, it it felt like. And then they also had the Colts, who won a Super Bowl and had Peyton Manning there, who everybody kind of loved Peyton Manning back in the day. So. I guess it felt like auto racing was still prevalent in the society or part of what made Indiana Indiana, but it felt like it was suffering a sports identity crisis, you know, um, and you just felt like we'll decide on what's going to be your sport, and I guess because they really tried hard, they tried so hard to promote basketball that I would turn on the local AM radio looking for a national sports show on Friday night when I would drive back from working at the grocery store, or some kind of talk radio program, and they would have on their high school basketball roundup show. And I was just like, this is so absurd. Not that I don't care at all, but like, really, high school basketball? Couldn't I just look this up later? So it was really weird. And then a few nights they broadcast football, and that was a little bit more interesting because, again, I like football more anyway, but I do like basketball if it's played well. Um, it was just weird because it seemed like they couldn't make up their mind. And I think that was because originally they used to be about the car racing. And while they do have some titles, in basketball and in football from their college and their pro teams, it's not like Kentucky where it's mainly dominated by two colleges who win at basketball. It's not like Wisconsin where Green Bay, the professional team, won a bunch of football. They just don't have a sport that sticks out. There's like every sport, and I guess it's okay. In some ways that's all right. It's kind of cool to know you could be a part of any sport there and they may win a title in it, but in other ways it feels like you don't. Okay, I went to the Colts game. That was fun. Are they going to be relevant again? When's that ride going to happen? Is this really what everybody does here? Or, oh, I went to the Pacers game. It never feels like you're fully a part of the experience. And then, like I said, Notre Dame is a good, they were a good national program in football, but they haven't won a title in a long time, and they feel like they're suburban Chicago. They're on Chicago's AM radio talking about them. So it's not like the rest of the state. Yeah, so I wanted to expand out a little bit and talk about some other sports regionalism that's kind of interesting. So Texas has become, they had the Friday Night Lights thing, and they talk all about football and the Dallas Cowboys from the 90s. But a lot of people don't remember back in the day that Texas really used to be kind of a baseball state. And what's interesting about baseball is Now it's kind of synonymous with almost being a rural sport or popular with rural people, but it was the original urban sport. Whereas football and basketball kind of started in more rural or less urban roots, and now they're more urban, and baseball is less. But baseball really had some urban roots in the beginning, with Boston and New York. And in Texas for a long time, it seemed to me like baseball was the preeminent sport. I mean, people there loved the Rangers a lot. And so they built the Astros out there. And it was really, but the thing with that was it was really weird seeing them be the team that made it to the title game in the made it to the World Series because it felt unnatural because they were not the Rangers. So it was in Houston. They have a problem in general, Houston, with identity crisis because they got an NFL team in. They used to have an NFL team called the Oilers for a long time. Then the Oilers moved to Tennessee and became the Titans. And then they brought back a team because they're like, Houston, we're big enough. We got to have a team. So they bring back a team. They call them the Texans. And it just feels weird. It feels ridiculous because they're clearly second fiddle to Dallas, no matter how good or bad they do, and no matter how good or bad Dallas does. And so they also have this baseball team, the Astros, have been there a long time, but they never won anything until recently, so they felt weird too. So Houston felt like this town that was just, oh, well, we're a really big city now, so we need these professional teams, but they're not really serious or taken seriously. So when the Astros did really well the last couple years, it felt, and they're doing well again this year. It just felt so weird and unnatural. It didn't fit right. Much like I was saying with LA bringing back football after being gone for 30 years, it just doesn't feel right, you know. I know everybody loves kind of the mantra around the Oakland Raiders, but they feel weird in Oakland. The Bay Area is San Francisco's area. The 49ers feel more there, because the Raiders haven't won a title since they moved to Oakland, and the 49ers had all those great teams, and it just feels odd. They don't feel like they belong there, in my opinion. I'm sure I'm going to get uh, nasty comments from anybody in Oakland, but I think the Warriors feel more like your team. Maybe you should focus more on the basketball and less on the football and the weird football team and your weird fans and whatever. Anyway, um, so the last thing I want to wrap up with weird things and sports regionalism is I cannot believe how weird it must have felt to have a brand new hockey team in Las Vegas and then them go to the finals in the very first year. Las Vegas has never been pro in anything. Their sports are not really that popular there except to bet on. And maybe back in the day when UNLV had that famous basketball coach, it was mildly popular, right? But it's Utah where they play the football. It's California where the pro teams are. It's Arizona, but they put a hockey team there, which is just odd in general to have a hockey team in the desert because, again, hockey mainly is popular in Canada and places like Minnesota and things. And then it goes to the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, gosh, it's so weird. I can't even imagine what it'd be like, what the games were. I didn't watch many of them because I was too busy and my team was long eliminated. But that must just feel so weird. Like the fan base, yeah, woohoo, we're in Vegas. We play hockey in between gambling in the desert. What? Yeah, so it's a trip. American sports regionalism is a trip. The NFL is the most dominant sport, but there's certainly places you can find other sports, and I think we will always find other sports. I don't know if the NFL will always remain dominant. People say that baseball was dominant before television. I guess it was. But I have a tough time believing that the NFL will just stop being the number one sport. I may be biased, though, because I loved football as a kid, and I still love football. So, anyway, That's what I think about that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'm sure I'll get nasty things from Oakland fans. Peace out.